Great. So before I talk about our plan today, I just want to acknowledge that some of you are already very experienced editors, and you've edited more than one edition for some series or another. So I would really welcome your input as we go through here. You can share your wisdom and experience with the many new editors on the call. And new editors, please feel free to ask questions. This is one of those things where there's no textbook on how to do this, and the knowledge is generally sort of kept behind you know, an expertise paywall, if you like, and you kind of have to already be commissioned to do an edition before you get to learn this stuff. So I'm learning how to teach people how to do this, so I would really welcome the questions that you ask along the way. So we're going to go through the structure of a LEMDO edition, which is similar to the structure of most other editions. Then I'll talk about the kind of preliminary work that you want to do for an edition, a lot of that work that you would do while you're putting together a proposal. Then we'll talk about preparing a semi-diplomatic transcription, the sorts of things that you need to think about and the time you need to budget for that. Then we'll talk about establishing your text via collation and modernization. And we'll talk about how to contextualize your play through annotations and critical paratexts. Finally, we'll talk about what the peer review process might look like. And lastly, we'll talk about loose ends. If you have questions, please do ask them as we go. If you put them in the chat, Navarro will alert me to the fact that there's a question there, or you can just put up your hand, or you can unmute and just break in. We're a small group, so that should be fine. If you want to wait, there will be a chance at the beginning of each section to ask questions about the previous section, and I've put a little blue question mark on this slide to remind myself to pause and give you a chance to ask questions. Like this. This is a section header slide, and there's the blue question mark. So let's talk about the structure of a LEMDO edition first. The basic structure of the edition is this. There'll be one or more semi-diplomatic transcriptions. There will be a collation of variants in early publications and also of subsequent editions and editorial interventions over time. There will be one or more modernized texts, annotations, and critical paratext. So we can have a look at the table of contents for a really full LEMDO edition. This is James Murdoch's Henry V, which I tend to use as my go-to example. So you may have seen this before in other webinars. James prepared this initially for the Internet Shakespeare editions and is revising it for publication in the new Internet Shakespeare editions on the LEMDO platform. Henry V is well known as a two-text play, and so James tended towards a very full edition by providing a transcription of the folio and quarto text as well as modern texts of both. You can see that at the apparatus here, he's done annotations and collations for each of those texts, and he's also written a pretty full series of critical paratexts, a general introduction, which is really the key piece that everybody needs to write, plus a critical survey, an essay on the stage and screen, a textual introduction, and then some bonus materials for the reader, a chronology and a family tree. The history plays are messy, and students generally benefit from family trees, plus a bibliography, which everybody will have. I'm just going to flag right now that while the Internet Shakespeare editions and Queen's Men's editions and Digital Renaissance editions had supplementary texts, we're really discouraging people from doing those right now. It would only be in exceptional cases that we would invite people to do supplementary text, and only after all the other components of the edition are done. So you will see those in LEMDO editions because part of our mandate is to remediate and republish what was on the Internet Shakespeare editions, but going forward, we're not requiring those, and we don't, in fact, really want them. So if we break that down to just the basics, you're probably not going to do as much as James did. You'll be doing one semi-diplomatic transcription, one modern text, a collation of early publications and selected editions. You will do a general introduction, or for a lot of plays that don't have a really rich critical tradition, you'll probably roll your critical introduction. You'll roll your critical introduction into your general introduction for plays that don't have a rich critical tradition, but for plays that do have a rich critical tradition, Shakespeare or Johnson, for example, maybe Middleton, you might actually offer a separate critical introduction. Everybody will have to write a standalone textual introduction. For plays that have a rich performance introduction, you might also offer a rich performance history, sorry. You might also write a performance introduction. For plays that don't have a performance history, you can simply include that in the general introduction. For the mayoral shows, for example, there's a single performance. Whatever you have to say about the performance of that event, you would include in your introduction, general introduction. Annotations are a must, and a bibliography is a must. So here's the challenge. All the pieces of the edition have to make a coherent argument about the play. And you'll want to link from one piece to another. So it certainly feels like you have to do everything everywhere all at once. And there are things that you'll probably want to do together, but it's not exactly the case that you have to do everything everywhere all at once. So we're going to try to break that down. If you are working collaboratively, you have an additional challenge in that you have to make sure that you're thinking along the same lines together. And if you divide up the work, one of you writes the textual introduction and one of you writes the performance introduction, you still need to be reading each other's pieces and making sure that it all adds up to a coherent whole, a coherent reading of the play. If you're doing annotations and one of you does Acts 1, 3, and 5, and another one does Act 2 and 4, again, you need to do the work of smoothing that out. Bonus, of course, is that you get somebody to share the work and share the fun and have conversations with. So I do encourage people to collaborate, with the caveat that there is that little extra piece of work you need to do to tie it all together. So the big question, where to start? There's actually two starting points if you're doing a LEMDO edition. You do need to have a technical startup meeting with Navara, our project manager, who is really wonderful at supporting editors through those first steps into editing in a digital environment. Navara will help you get set up with Oxygen, the program that we use to encode text. Will help you get set up with a Netlink ID, help you download what you need in order to work in our repository. So that's one starting point. While all of that is happening, you can be learning about your play and filling in gaps that you might not have filled in if you've already written your proposal. So let's talk about that preliminary work. Before you even start working in the repository, there are some things that you'll want to do. Number one, you'll want to figure out what the significant texts of your play are. And questions that you need to ask yourself are, do I have a one text play or a multi-text play? Henry V, Hamlet, Othello, Musidorus, Spanish tragedy. What else? There's a number of multi-text plays where you simply can't ignore a key text. How many early publications are there? DEEP is the obvious starting point, the database of early English playbooks. DEEP has ingested quite a bit of information from Greg's bibliography of the printed drama to the Restoration, and also corrected some of it. I still go back to Greg because Greg actually gives you quite a bit more information than DEEP does. And you'll want to skim the textual scholarship. The reason you want to do that is because your first task is to prepare or check a semi-diplomatic transcription. And if I don't already know what the logical text is, I usually do for Shakespeare and the more canonical plays. But if you're working on something that is not well known at all, that maybe I don't know about, I'm going to be asking you which text to get ready for you to check for your semi-diplomatic transcription. What are the significant textual issues? So you'll want to keep skimming the textual scholarship, look at past editions if there are any, read the textual essays in those past editions. Why? You need to know in advance, and certainly when you're writing your proposal, what sort of puzzles you're going to have to solve. And you'll be solving those puzzles as you're preparing your semi-diplomatic transcription, or at least noticing those puzzles when you're preparing the semi-diplomatic transcription. So the sort of puzzles you can expect are, problems in the print shop, verse lines that were set as prose because the compositors are running out of room, a high number of instances of turned pieces of type, for example, speeches where the stage directions or the speech prefixes are set on one page and the speech on the other page, so things get divided up in odd ways. You'll have to know what textual puzzles to solve so that you can pay special attention to those when you're doing your collation. You want to know how other editors in the past have dealt with those issues. And when you're preparing your modern text, you're going to be resolving those puzzles as you modernize in a way that works for your vision for the edition and for the readers that you're working towards. And you also want to be looking towards your textual essay. So you're taking notes for your textual essay from day one. What are the significant previous editions? You are all good scholars and you could put together a list of editions on your own by consulting bibliographies and doing searches, but we're really lucky that we have Brett Greatly Hirsch on the LEMDO team, and he has a massive database of editions since 1709 with Rowe, and that's the Bibliography of Editions of Early English Drama. We haven't figured out a way to publish it yet, but if you ask him, he will write back to you within a day with a complete list of all the editions that you need to take into account. With Shakespeare and key canonical authors, you will not be able to look at or collate all of the editions. Keep in mind that there are about 800 19th century editions alone, so you have to be judicious in selecting a few key ones from the 19th and 20th centuries. For non-canonical plays, you'll probably want to collate all editions, if indeed there are any editions at all. So get to know what the significant preview editions are, because you're going to be collating relatively early in the process. Also, take some time to figure out what the key critical issues are for your play. Check the World Shakespeare Bibliography, check the MLA International Bibliography, skim articles, monographs, or reviews of monographs, book chapters, skim the critical introductions and other editions. And as you know, the key critical issues change over time, so you'll want to focus your attention on the most recent stuff. Why? Because you're going to be compiling your bibliography and thinking about your general introduction all along. So you're making notes for that general introduction while you're working on other things. The kinds of things that can wait: a deep reading of the criticism and the textual scholarship, performance histories, source studies, and contextual materials for readers, chronologies and images, for example. Just bracket them off at the beginning of your process and don't think too much about them. There are some questions that you should ask yourself before you even start editing in any medium, whether you're working in the repo or preparing bits and pieces of your edition in some other medium. What am I editing towards? So you will need to talk to your anthology lead if you're editing for a particular anthology. If not, you can default to the Digital Renaissance Editions editorial guidelines, which are, I'm happy to say, almost ready for encoding. Every critical edition is trying to reconstruct someone's intention, whether it is an author's, a scribe's, a company's, a publisher's, a patron's, an editor's, or someone else's. So, be clear about what your vision is for your edition. Why? Because the answer affects your choice of copy text, the way you modernize, what you collate, and how to contextualize the text. A second key question to ask yourself, the second key question, for whom am I editing this text? And the LEMDO edition is designed primarily for students, but secondarily for scholars, for theater practitioners who might use the texts in the rehearsal hall. We hope they will. And also for machines. A LEMDO edition is machine readable. From the DRE editorial guidelines, DRE editions are designed for the use of students, scholars, and theater practitioners because they are, first and foremost, accessible teaching editions for classroom use. All DRE editions feature modernized spelling and punctuation with commentaries designed to elucidate and explain unfamiliar terms, historical and cultural references, and in the case of drama, performance histories. So that gives you a really useful question to run things through. So do I need to annotate this for a third year student in a classroom? And if the answer is yes, then you annotate it. If the answer is no, then you can leave it unannotated. You also need to think about the scholar, especially for plays that do not have an editorial history. If your edition is the first one ever or the first one in a very long time, you need to expect that it will be more than students who are using your edition. It will be scholars as well. And so they are going to want the kind of scholarly richness that we expect from a scholarly edition. Okay, I'll pause for questions here or comments from our experienced editors. Okay, we'll move on. So your first step is to prepare your semi-diplomatic transcription or transcriptions. There's a terminology change here. You might be more used to seeing these as old spelling texts. We've moved away from the term old spelling text because it actually refers to a very particular kind of edition, which was a critical edition that retained old spelling. That's not what we're doing. We're actually doing semi-diplomatic transcriptions. So I've aimed for a more precise language here for LEMDO. There are a few ways that you might do this. For quite a few plays, we already have a transcription. It's been prepared by somebody else and is probably in pretty good shape. It is one of my kind of go-to activities for students who want to contribute to an edition. I'll have them do the semi-diplomatic transcription. For Shakespeare, we have semi-diplomatic transcriptions that we inherited from the Internet Shakespeare editions. And in some cases, we have transcriptions from other sources. And so your job might be to check that transcription and basically sign off after you've proofread it and corrected it that it is a good semi-diplomatic transcription. If there is no transcription, but your play has been printed and transcribed for EBO TCP, I can download that transcription from GitHub and convert it to a baseline LEMDO encoding. And then you would have to correct it and bring it up to LEMDO standards. So for example, EBO TCP does not transcribe things like formworks, catchwords, signature numbers. So you would need to add that. There are gaps in TCP transcriptions. You would need to supply those gaps. They don't tag glyphs, ligatures, long S's. We do, so you would need to go through that. But it's certainly less time than doing the transcription yourself. Also, an EBO TCP transcription is a transcription of a particular copy. You might have ready access to a different copy, or you might think that it should be, the transcription should be based on a different copy. There are some criteria that we can give you to think through that question. So if that's the case, then you'll want to align that transcription with the copy you actually have. And that would mean transcribing press variants as they stand in the copy that you choose to transcribe. If your printed play has not been transcribed for EBO TCP, which occasionally happens with later editions, Or if it's a manuscript play, then you're going to have to make the transcription yourself. That's a lot of work. So if you opt for number 3, be especially careful to be sure that the text that you're going to transcribe is the text that you're going to take as the copy text for your modern text. I certainly have no objection to people doing more than one semi-diplomatic transcription, but do be judicious with your time. Scholars will consult that. It's plausible that people will use those semi-diplomatic transcriptions in the classroom. I know I do. I like to point students to what their editor started with so that they can see that what they're reading is an editorial construction. It empowers them to question the editor's choices and think through the text themselves. But you want to get on with the work of editing the modern text. So don't feel like you need to transcribe all 18 texts of Musidorus. I have a student working on Musidorus this summer, and we've had a lot of fun digging up all 17 complete texts and the fragment of an 18th. But we did have to decide which 2 are we going to transcribe. For time management, you'll probably go page by page. That's the basic unit of a semi-diplomatic transcription, is the page. So you can manage your time that way. If I have to stop for the day, I'll try at least to make it to the bottom of a page. You need to follow the transcription guidelines of the anthology that you're editing for, or default to the DRE LEMDO transcription guidelines. There is some latitude, so you can either be very fussy and particular and descriptive with your semi-diplomatic transcription, or you can tend more towards the semi and away from the diplomatic. Whatever decisions you make, record them for consistency. You will forget, especially if you do Act 1 in the summer and then have to put it down and do Act 2 over Christmas. Make sure you've recorded your decisions so that your semi-diplomatic transcription is consistently transcribed all the way through. If you're proofing the transcription, you'll probably want to budget 2 or 3 days for that. If you're correcting an EBO TCP transcription against the same or a different copy, give yourself about a week, and that's full-time hours. So if you don't have full-time hours to do this, then amortize it over a longer period of time. If you're doing the transcription yourself, probably 3 full-time weeks or 120 hours. Those people who are doing manuscripts probably will need longer depending on the state of the manuscript. And if the play is short, you can take a bit of time off, and if the play is extra long, add a bit of time. I always think of 2,000 as short and 4,000 as long. So Comedy of Errors, you've got a nice short play. Pause for questions. Okay, let's move on. The next thing you need to do is establish the text, and you do that by collating and then modernizing. So you have a good starting point. Once your semi-diplomatic transcription is complete, LEMDO has written a conversion, and with a press of a button, it would take us about 30 seconds. That's quite nice. We'll take that semi-diplomatic transcription and we'll convert it to a template for you to modernize. And what that means is that we'll take out some of the tagging that you require in the semi-diplomatic transcription, and we'll replace it with the baseline tagging for a modern text. But we don't modernize the text for you. Machines can't do that. It's a work that has to be done by a human. We'll leave the semi-diplomatic transcription in place. So you've got the file that will become your modern text. You have your semi-diplomatic text in it, and you can leave it in semi-diplomatic form for quite a while, depending on what you decide to do next. So here you have a workflow choice. Some editors like to collate first, and some editors like to modernize first. Your anthology lead might insist that you do things in a particular order, but if they don't, this is a choice that you'll have to make on your own. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. if you collate first, you get to take stock of the textual and editorial history before you start making your own decisions. It's like doing a literature review, kind of on a micro level. What has editor X done at this point? What did David Bevington do here? What did Gary Taylor do? The downside is that you might be unduly influenced by other people if you've done all of your collations. On the other hand, if you modernize first, you're not influenced by other people, but it actually can become quite hard to collate later because you've started to change your text. And so it can be a bit trickier to track how that text now differs from all of the other things that you can collate it against. So that's a conversation you can have with your anthology lead or with me or Sarah Neville or an experienced editor if you don't have an anthology lead. For time management, going act by act makes sense. If the play has acts, if not, go page by page. You want to record your modernization decisions for consistency, especially if your work sessions are spread out over a long period of time or interrupted. Do be judicious about the number of texts you collate and the type of things that you collate. So you need to go back to the question of audience and also consult with your anthology lead. So there will be an anthology level decision about what constitutes an accidental, something that doesn't affect the meaning and doesn't need to be collated, and what constitutes a substantive, something that does change the meaning and needs to be collated. And that's something that can shift back and forth depending on the anthology. So I would budget 3 full-time weeks or 120 hours. I've had my tax interns working on collation this summer, and watching them work, I'm sort of expecting that a collation where you have all of your books ready to go, all of your past editions, either in physical form or PDFs or online, that's going to take about 3 weeks. You can look ahead while you're in this phase of the editorial process. You might want to start your annotation file now, which will include your textual notes. While you're collating, while you're modernizing, that's a really good time to start writing your textual notes. Even if you don't have them in their final form, at least make a note of what you want to say at this point while it's fresh in your mind, while you're making those decisions. You can also leave comments in the file about things you want to gloss or comment on later. So don't lose the thinking that you're doing as you go, make some notes. And you should also be making notes for the textual introduction while you are wrestling with your collation and modernizing your text. Yeah, another pause for questions.
We have some questions.
Okay.
Okay, so firstly, I wanted to ask about the workflow of collation and whether are you doing this in the XML file as you go, or are you just making like charts, or what's your preferred backend workflow for collation?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask because I will always do things in XML. I like to evaporate my thoughts in XML, like Sir Philip Sidney evaporating his thoughts in a sonnet. So what I've watched other people do, some people like me will do it directly in the XML. I've been watching one of the students this summer with great interest. That student has prepared a lengthy Google Doc, and in it they have listed all of the readings. And then once they pick the reading they want, they move it up into the lemma position in their document. I'm going to ask if I can take a screenshot of what they're doing to put in our documentation, because it's an interesting way to do that. So, it really depends. One thing to think about is, where are you going to do this work? It really helps to have a nice long table. If you've got physical copies of the books, you can lay them all out, and you can work on a laptop, and you can move your laptop along the table as you go. and then go back to the beginning of the table as you're moving on to the next passage and go through all your additions again. So it might be easier not to be working in XML at that point.
Okay, that's good to know. And it would also be helpful. Like, I work really well from templates, so I would love as many templates as you have of all the different stages that you're talking about. But the other question I have is about modernization. Do we automatically modernize like the ETH verb endings, like go with and things like that? We want to move those into modern English?
It depends. That is exactly the sort of thing that a good set of editorial guidelines should address. If it's verse, I wouldn't modernize goeth to goes, because goeth has 2 syllables and goes has 1. So you're actually changing the meter. Okay. If it's prose and your decision, your anthology level decision is to modernize those to goes, then you should do it consistently.
Okay.
Yeah, but I also think that there's value in letting students see old verb forms. No, that's what the text actually says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ours is verse, so I think that's why we thought it might make sense to retain the go with as well, but that is an older verb form. So okay.
Yeah.
And I have another collation question, which is about so you pick the base editions that you're going to collate all of, but maybe there is one early version that has one interesting reading. Like, so do you have to collate them? Like, for instance, like a dice edition or something that's like, do you have to collate that every single time? Or could you say, here are the 4 that I'm collating, and if it's interesting, I will collate another edition?
Go with the latter option.
Okay.
But always tell the truth about what you're doing. So, if the truth is that you are collating 4 editions to an equal depth across the edition, say that, and then say precisely what you did say, which is that you've taken a few interesting readings from dice.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Janelle, may I briefly pop in?
Yes.
We do have templates, XML templates for many things, that if you are already working in our repository, you can take a look at it. They're in a templates folder called templates. And of course, if you've got questions or want to go through them with somebody, let me know, and I'll go through those with you as well.
Yeah. Jesus has put in the chat that with the go with goes question, the rationale usually is to modernize spelling, not morphology. So retain go with.
Thanks, Jesus. End of our
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, let's talk about contextualization then. The relevant parts of the edition that do the work of contextualizing the play are the annotations and the critical paratexts. Once you are at this stage of editing, you want to get serious about the bibliography if you haven't already. Keep it updated as you find new materials. You will be citing sources throughout the critical paratexts and throughout the annotations. So this is the point where you make sure that bibliography is tracking along with the work that you're doing. There's nothing worse than trying to track down sources later. Okay, and in the process of remediation, we have found that sometimes editors point to Bevington, but then they have 3 things by Bevington on their bibliography. So make a note not just of the author, but which thing you're citing by that author. There's some big workflow decisions to keep in mind, and those decisions can be made according to 2 principles. Annotations should point to the critical paratext. So you can use the annotations to flag when people should go and look at the textual introduction or some part of the critical introduction. The nice thing about a LEMDO edition is that you can make a very precise link that will take the reader directly to the thing that you want them to look at. And critical paratext should point to each other and also to the modern text or to your semi-diplomatic transcription if you are talking about something about that text. from your textual essay mainly. And you might want to write annotations and critical paratext simultaneously, or you might want to leave notes to yourself so that you remember to make links later. So if you're doing your annotations and you think, oh, I really need to say more about this in the critical introduction, leave a note in your annotation, explain this further in my section on gender in the text, whatever critical issues you need to take up. Right, and likewise, if you're working on your critical paratext and you think, oh, I really should supply a local annotation, make yourself a note or do it at that time. Then you have some local workflow decisions with annotations. You can annotate in passes, which I think is the approach that works best. It certainly works best for me, and it's the one I see other editors adopting. And so you might do all your textual notes while you're doing or immediately after you've finished your collation, while you're thinking about textual issues, while you have all the additions out on your table or up on your tabs in your web browser. Then you would turn your attention to glosses. So before you even start your critical paratext, you might go through the entire text, do a pass from beginning to end, where you gloss words that the reader is going to want to have glossed for them. I like to do them all at once because you don't need to gloss a word every time it shows up. You want to gloss it the first time and expect that your reader is going to learn from that. If you're spreading out your glosses over a long period of time, you'll probably end up having to delete some later glosses where you've simply repeated something that you've done earlier and forgotten about. Commentary notes, you'll probably want to do while you're writing the critical survey because you're often quoting from other critics. You're often scaffolding a mini critical reading of a particular moment in the play when you're writing a commentary note. And you're also supplying a little bit of your own interpretation at the same time. You probably want to do lexical and lineation notes after that. So lexical notes, you know what, I'm going to rewrite this slide later because I actually disagree with myself here. I like to do lexical notes at the same time as the glosses because you're digging into the Oxford English Dictionary and lexicons of early modern English at the same time. And lineation notes you probably want to do with the textual notes. Lineation notes are notes when you've relineated something. So if it hasn't been composited in a way that reflects whether the text is prose or verse, you'll be doing some relineation. I would leave performance notes until you're writing about the performance history. Or if you've decided to take a performance as research approach to the edition and you are doing a semi-staged reading of the play or you're working with a theater company, you could be writing your performance notes while you're writing about that performance as research exercise. We do have an option for pedagogical notes. They're certainly not required. And I designed things this way because I imagined that you or another editor might come back later and write pedagogical notes for the edition, or somebody who's not an editor but is a really great teacher might teach with your edition and then prepare pedagogical notes. And if you want to do them yourself, you might try teaching from your edition, which is a great way to get feedback on your edition. Assign that text in your own class, have your students use your edition, pay attention to what they find confusing, pay attention to the questions they ask, pay attention to things they find tricky about the play, and then write some pedagogical notes after that. The other approach is to go scene by scene and do all your notes of all types simultaneously. The advantage of doing that is that your notes will be very complementary at the scene level. The disadvantage is that individual types of notes may be less consistent across the whole edition. So your glosses may be less consistent. Your lexical notes may be less consistent. Okay, so for the critical paratext, we basically have the two models that I alluded to earlier. Model 1, which is the fuller model. You will write a general introduction, it will point to a critical survey, a textual introduction, and a performance survey. Model 2 is a general introduction that includes sections on criticism and performance. Okay, so which you do depends on what your anthology lead is directing you to do, and also on how rich the critical and performance traditions are for your particular play. You will write a separate textual introduction for both models. The good thing to know is that we do have this print series that is parallel with the XML edition. Only the general introduction will be published in the LEMDO Hornbook print edition. So even if you write a separate critical survey or textual introduction, you will probably want to say a little bit about criticism in the text in the general introduction, and then point people to the longer essay, which is available online, of course. Local workflow recommendations: always make notes for the textual essay while you're collating and establishing the text. You may even start writing paragraphs for it. Do your textual annotations, note type equals textual in XML while you're collating, and finalize your textual essay as soon as you finish the collation and modernization. You can even send it in for peer review at that point. Because this sort of edition is modular, it can be published before the rest of the edition. It can certainly be peer reviewed in pieces. Do your lexical annotations, note type equals lexical, while you're writing glosses, because you'll be dipping into the OED and LEMI to write your glosses. You can write your performance notes and the performance history simultaneously, and write the commentary notes and the critical survey simultaneously. Time budget. It really depends on the richness of the editorial and critical history, the length of your play, how often it's been performed. But general suggestions for timeline: if you're doing your edition proposal, you do need to set out a timeline. So budget 4 months to write your general introduction and critical survey. I've had so many editors say, I'm going to write my general introduction this summer, and that's what they do that summer, and it seems to be about the right amount of time, 3 to 4 months. I would say 2 months to write annotations, possibly more for Shakespeare. 2 months to write a performance history, more for Shakespeare, a lot less for other plays, a lot less for plays that have no performance history at all. You can expand that timeline to accommodate whatever other duties you have to take care of in your life. Few of us have 2 straight months to do something like this unless we're on study leave. Pause for questions and comments.
I have a little question, and I don't know if it goes here or later. Are you also still interested in having us send in one sample scene for like as we get started on the editions, or is that something, or do you want us to send in parts of the textual intro first, or?
That's really so my role as director of LEMDO is that I support anthology leads while they support you. But my position is sort of weird in that I am anthology lead for moms, and I'm sharing the job for NISE and DRE with other folks. So I'll speak with my coordinating editor slash anthology lead hat on, and I would say yes. Get feedback early and often, because if you are on the wrong track, you want to correct your course before you invest a lot more time, and avoiding errors and saving time later for everybody. Get some feedback early on.
Perfect, thanks.
All right, peer review. So peer review can be done incrementally, but it can't be done piecemeal. So as I said at the beginning, everything about the edition has to hang together, but even within that, there are pieces that have to hang together with each other more than with the rest of the edition. So the text, the modernized text, the collation, and the textual essay those things can usually be peer reviewed together because collectively they're making an argument about the text. The annotations and critical paratext can be peer reviewed together because collectively they are contextualizing the play and making an argument about what it means, with the exception of the textual annotations. A holistic approach to peer review would be to review the whole edition at once. And that's a decision that you need to make with your anthology lead, unless your anthology lead happens to be me, in which case you'll talk to me about it. So there's a couple different things that happen here. I'm going to actually bump ahead to this slide. If you are encoding your own text, LEMDO will review your encoding for validity. You actually get a lot of micro peer review along the way, because if you're doing encoding, you're constantly getting these checks and balances from our schema and schematron. Okay, so I actually think of that. Those messages, if you're working in Oxygen, it's kind of like mini peer review. Don't do this, do this other thing instead. And that's one of the many reasons for which I encourage editors to do their own encoding, because you're being kept to a kind of norm or standard simply by virtue of working in the LEMDO environment and getting these messages from Oxygen. If you do your own encoding, I, or a member of the LEMDO team here at UVic, will also be reviewing your encoding and tweaking it. Okay, we'll be monitoring diagnostics, and making sure all your links are correct, making sure that you have logically encoded titles, that you've logically encoded quotations. But the content review would mainly fall to your anthology lead, whoever it happens to be. If LEMDO encodes your edition for you, which we can do, usually we ask you to find some money so that I can pay folks like Navara. If we encode your edition, we're making the micro editorial decisions that you would be making yourself if you were encoding. We don't make them without consulting you. So there's a lot of back and forth while we check and correct and query your content. So what we're finding is that where I'm doing the remediation or I'm doing the encoding, I and the LEMDO team, I am doing a kind of first level peer review. Okay, so one of the anthologies has actually decided that they don't send things out to peer reviewers because they consider me as their first peer reviewer, right? And I do know a lot about Renaissance drama, so I feel like I can responsibly take on that role. For time budget, as you all know, peer review can take an awfully long time. Everybody's busy. It's hard to find peer reviewers, but you know, I would never give a reviewer less than 3 months to review a complete edition. You know, the first reviewer could be the LEMDO team, and then the anthology lead's responsible for finding another peer reviewer. Depending on what kind of feedback you get, maybe 1 to 3 months for revisions. If you've been getting feedback all along, then peer review shouldn't be a complete shock. Questions or comments? I think we're going to go about 5 minutes over here, if that's okay. So while peer review is happening, you can take care of some loose ends. You can write acknowledgements. You can be securing image permissions. The nice thing about a digital edition is that you can include as many lovely color images as you feel are appropriate in the critical introduction. You know, most of us have this problem where we have to cut images that we'd really like our readers to see. With the digital edition, we can include them. But you do need to have the permissions to do them. You can prepare any bonus materials, so chronologies, plot summaries, pedagogical notes. Once revisions are done, you will need to spend some time proofreading. So you'll be proofreading the digital edition on screen, and you'll be proofreading the print edition. Now, the digital edition and the print edition are generated from the same underlying XML. So the content of the digital and the print edition should be the same. The print edition does not include everything that's in the digital edition, but where it does include content from the digital edition, the content should be the same. So you're proofreading the print edition for things like layout, and you might catch things in the print edition that are also problems in the digital edition. We will correct them in the underlying XML, and then the digital and the print edition will both be corrected at the same time. We will ask you to enter your final corrections in XML unless you're really uncomfortable with that, in which case we will enter them for you. Even if you haven't encoded your edition in XML, it's usually not too hard to enter your corrections in XML, which is actually a really good way to start learning XML if you haven't done it yet. You know, you look at an XML file, you don't have to worry about the encoding, but you can at least see how it works. And then you work with the LEMDO team to finalize the metadata for your edition and license your edition for publication in the anthology. And then, you know, sometimes you have to wait for the release of the anthology. So an anthology might do a new release because of your edition, or it might be waiting on another editor to release 2 editions at the same time. You know, that's really between you and your anthology lead, but LEMDO will support the release process with 2 months notice at pretty much any time of the year. Okay, let me, I'm going to put up my resource slide here. These are all clickable links, and we'll send the slides to you after the session here so that you have all this information. These links do go to our LEMDO dev site, which is not crawled by Google or other search engines, and it's also a place where we can flail about and make mistakes. So we don't want those links shared with people outside the LEMDO editors groups, and especially not on social media. So I will stop sharing now and ask you if you have any questions or want to make any comments.
I'll just say this was amazingly helpful, Janelle. Thank you for putting it together for your time. I feel like, oh, all right now, which is way better than I felt before this.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Thank you, Susan. We will.
I do absolutely want to add thank you. I have another bits and bobs question, which is about citations. Because we're putting them into structure, do you have any automatic transforms that take things, say, from an RIS file or a Zotero to automatically put them into the structure that we want for LEMDO, or are we doing that by hand?
That's an excellent question. Ada has made a spreadsheet this summer where you can enter all of your bibliographical citations into the spreadsheet, and it will automatically wrap the tags around them. It would be really cool to develop an XSLT to take things out of Zotero and format it correctly. I think you can download TEI from Zotero. It wouldn't be precisely what LEMDO uses, but that's something we could maybe put on our bucket list of things to do.
Awesome, thanks. And I would love to possibly see what Ada has been working on too.
Yeah, we'll get that shared and documented. And Ada did it of their own initiative, so I was thrilled to bits. Thank you, Ada.
And I have another question in my omnibus list of questions here, which is for the anchors, we're only putting those in the modern version, right? So I wanted to confirm about that it's the modern version that we basically hook everything onto, not the semi-diplomatic.
Yes, that's right. Your annotation and your collation will be done against the modern text. Okay. You can add light annotations to your semi-diplomatic transcription if there are things you really have to say about that text. But that's really an exceptional thing. Because you're dealing with a manuscript, you actually may want to do it, but Marissa and Jamie and Molly, you know, you're dealing with well-traversed terrain. There's really, I don't think you would need to do anything like that.
Yeah, we've had a few cases where people will link to anchors and semi-diplomatic transcriptions from textual essays, but they are exceptional, I think.
Yes, from Julius Caesar's edition, it was about stage directions that seemed to be more flexible between the modern and the semi-dip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Sada. We will be running this workshop again in October, fingers crossed. Navarra and I have put together a connection grant application asking for $50,000 for a year-long training program. And we will start, if we get the money, we'll start by running this workshop again in October, and then we'll have a workshop every month that will go through every stage of the edition. And, you know, if you attend all of them or listen to the recordings of all of them, you will get a complete course in how to prepare an edition, with 2 additional workshops every month by Navarra on technical things. So we hope at the end of the year that you will feel like you are really well-trained, competent, confident editors ready to, you know, do all the pieces of the edition. It would be ideal if you can do the sections of the edition along with us, but that's not realistic for most of you unless you're on sabbatical. So you can take the knowledge and then use it when you're ready in a year or so after this. So, you know, pour a libation on the altar of the shirt gods if you're thinking of us in the next couple of weeks, and maybe we'll get that money. Okay, I'm going to release you into your morning, afternoon, or evening. Thanks so much for coming, everybody. And you can watch for a follow-up email with a link to the video and the slides.